All right, let's get some good footage just for the intro of the video. Obviously, we want people to be really impressed with the gameplay. Damn it. And that looked really good, but actually, I want to get players 8 footage, not players 1 footage. This headbanging crossbow sorceress is unironically the strongest fire build in the game. It's also unironically the strongest Boazon build in the game. And this is what it does on players 8 difficulty. Man, they're wild for this one. Patch 2.6 of Season 3 Diablo 2 Resurrected, they put in some pretty pivotal changes that have these minor tweaks to skills that have massive, massive implications, and this one right here for the sorceress is just one of them. They fixed an issue where Fire Mastery, and by proxy all sources of elemental fire damage, wouldn't apply to ranged attacks when your attack was enchanted. For people who didn't know, when you cast Enchant, it reads your Fire Mastery and all sources of plus to elemental fire damage that you have. It also reads that again when you actually attack with an enchanted skill. So if you enchant yourself with 5,000 damage and then you have another 300% fire damage on your gear and on Fire Mastery, you're going to do close to 15 to 20,000 fire damage on a melee attack. The issue here is that that didn't happen for ranged attacks. While you would get the huge enchant bonus on the initial cast, your arrow would just do its regular amount of enchant damage and not read your Fire Mastery again, so it wouldn't double dip. And that goes for any sources of elemental damage and any sources of +2 elemental skill damage, lightning, cold, poison, etc. Now what we don't have is a clarification on whether or not this applies to those as well, or if this was just a fix for Fire Enchant. Hopefully we get some clarification. Luckily for us, the Diablo 2 planner already had this logic baked into it, so I can literally show you the difference in damage. We're using a level 20 enchant on a character that has full synergy and full Fire Mastery. Without anything else, enchant is only adding upwards of 659 damage on to your attack. So when we look at a sorceress using a bow that's had enchant applied to them, you notice that the fire damage on this is 504 to 659. And then the only other thing that you need to know for all of this to make sense without me getting down into the nitty-gritty is that a skill like Exploding Arrow will apply fire damage to the explosion. So here we have an Amazon using that same bow with a level 1 Exploding Arrow that should only be doing 5 to 14 fire damage on explosion. If we maintain that same enchant on her, so 504 to 659 damage, you'll see that the total Exploding Arrow damage for a level 1 Exploding Arrow is 505 to 664, and that's because it's carrying the enchant damage on the explosion as well. So there you go. Let me show you some awesome gameplay where you can take this thing even to players 8 Hell Chaos and still absolutely melt everything. And then I'll show you the gear, the stats, the skills that I recommend, and get into the nitty gritty about all the different mechanics that you need to understand for the build to really shine. So here, players 8 Chaos. We have a ton of monsters that are typically completely immune to fire. Players 8, absolutely no problem. Even pit lords who have massive amounts of fire res even after our Sunder Charm breaks it, still not a problem at all. And again, just to re-show players 8 here. With all the benefits of an energy shield sorceress, the 65 FCR breakpoint, as well as the massive, massive clear damage from our Demon Machine crossbow, we're able to completely annihilate everything here as if it was nothing. You'll see Lord Desace goes down in a couple hits. Grand Vizier died in 2 shots. You have all the benefits of being a sorceress. Shoot through to Infector of Souls, and he's dead. And here's the best part too. Typically a build like this that's able to absolutely cream high density monster count really suffers at boss clear speed, but let's see what it looks like on Diablo. Again, players 8. Hit him with a couple statics, teleport out of range. Boop, boop, boop. Players 8 Diablo dead. What was that? 6 shots? Maybe 5. I'm going to show the gear, stats, skills, and overall equipment, just so that the people who already understand how this build functions and already understand the implication of the bug fix that they put into place for Enchant and Fire Mastery synergy, just so that you can see it so you can build it yourself. For the people who want a bit more explanation for some of the deeper mechanics, just follow the timestamps below so you can get to wherever you need to in the video, so I don't waste your time and you get everything that you need. For the gear itself, you're using a demon machine. You don't need to upgrade this thing at all. The base weapon damage really doesn't matter. It only needs a 15 IAS jewel in it to reach its maximum frame attack speed of 11 frames. You can't get faster than that, even if you have fanaticism aura. Realistically, you should have a 15 IAS, 15 all-res jewel in this. I just put an ED jewel in it. Our resistances are just off being capped without that in this bow. Obviously, we're using Flickering Flame. You would want a perfect roll of level 8 and minus 15 res. I just took a random roll of this helmet, so this gear literally isn't even perfect at this point, although you're going to absolutely snap at me the moment that I show you this amulet, but I promise you, you don't need it. Yes, I'm using a 220, 30 strength, 20 all-res amulet. We actually only need to hit the 65 FCR breakpoint, so with the rest of our gear, you could either put a 10 FCR ring down in your ring slot as opposed to this SOJ, and then you just need a 210 amulet with all-res on it for you to feel safe. Or if you got a 215 amulet, that is actually what we need to hit the breakpoint, so then you wouldn't even need an FCR ring down below. I hate when I show amulets like this, but quite literally I'm just using a hero editor pack to be able to show off these characters, and this is just the easiest thing to throw on. I really just need to go make a cheaper amulet so that people stop giving me so much hate for showing this thing. Skin of the Viper Magi with a 5/5 fire facet, Mage Fist because obviously Mage Fist. We're using Ravenfrost for the Cannot Be Frozen, as well as that huge amount of additional dexterity on it is going to get massive boost from our enchant. That's really important for us to hit a really good chance to hit. We're using Razor Tail because Razor Tail, in addition to the demon machine, gets us 99% chance to pierce. That's incredibly important to get multiple explosions per arrow shot on a group of monsters that you're firing into, but we'll get more into that in the mechanics section of the video. Stone of Jordan, like I said, this could be a 10 FCR ring. It could be any plus skill ring, but this one's the easiest, and it's also really nice since we are an energy shield build. Sandstorm Trek, you might think, oh, there's a ton of other options that you can put into here. The 20 faster hit recovery is really nice because it's the only place to easily get it on our gear without needing skill faster hit recovery grand charms, and it gets us enough frames off of our hit recovery animation so that if we ever get hit with a super huge amp damage curse fanaticism attack that manages to do enough through our energy shield to put us into hit recovery, we're not completely screwed. Across the bottom, I do recommend all resistance small charms here, or at the very least charms that have up to 11 resistance across the board until you hit max, and then anything else you want to fill with whatever magic find you have. Obviously, we're using skillers. These are just 40 life skillers. You don't need the life for an energy shield build, but it is nice to have. A Sunder charm as well as a Geeds on top of our torch and our Annihilus charm. On swap, you're going to see one stat on this piece of gear that looks a little bit weird, but again, I'm going to explain this in the mechanics section. This is an Ashuda's. It doesn't normally have 332 fire enhanced skill damage. Completely ignore that for right now. This isn't even the best in slot option right here. You would technically want a 3 to fire skill tree, 3 to enchant, 3 to fire mastery, 3 to energy shield, 2 socketed orb, but I've never seen one of those in the real game, and I'm not about to pretend like you can go find one. But technically speaking, there is a stronger pre-buff option for this build. Then we use the Spirit Monarch. Feel free to use an Ethereal Spirit Monarch because you should never be using this swap except during the buff stage when you're casting Enchant and Bow Battle Command on yourself. We do carry a Call to Arms as well just to get this initial boost. Technically speaking, you want to do this before you do your enchant for the +1 skill level. You really don't need it, but there is a little bit of a min-max there. This will make us so that we have 1,000 life and over 2,000 mana. So we want to keep this up as often as possible, again, since we're an energy shield build. For the pre-buff portion, you're going to want to have 4 additional skillers that you would swap out to so that your full inventory is full of plus to skill. You would use a 3 to fire skill amulet. Completely ignore that fire skill damage on it. Again, that'll be covered in the mechanics section. An additional +1 skill ring. You would want an Arachnid's Mesh belt as well. And then a +3 to enchant Ormus robes, again socketed with a fire facet jewel, and preferably with a perfect fire roll on the base item. With our full fire enchant kit on right now, we have max warmth, max enchant, and max fire mastery. That gives us a level 51 enchant and a level 48 fire mastery, gaining us 359 additional fire damage, with a base skill enchant damage between 5,000 to 6,000 damage, which again will double dip on fire mastery after the patch goes into effect. For the rest of the skills, we're going to pick up frozen armor, and then we're going to spec into fully synergizing telekinesis for our energy shield. I want to have at least the 16-yard radius on static field on our primary swap. so that when I static the screen, we're hitting almost all of it from end to end. We're only really missing monsters in the corners of your screen, but from left to right and top to bottom, we're hitting everything. And then we put the rest of our dump points into energy shield. When we are on swap, we're somewhere around the 71% effective absorb after we use battle orders battle command, so it's important to keep that up. And we're only taking 3/4 of a point of damage per damage dealt to our mana, which is the most effective you can with a full synergy and telekinesis. Now, the line character screen looks like we're doing 72,000 damage. That's another problem with the game right now, is that the character screen was always showing as if Enchant double dipped when you were using a ranged attack, but it was never true. You're only getting the base Enchant damage that you normally would have. We want to have enough strength on our kit so that when we're using our pre-buff setup, where we're going to be missing out on some strength, we have enough to be able to use the Ethereal Spirit Monarch. You don't need to put any additional points into dexterity. If you notice that your attack rating is a bit low, which we do address with our Mercenary, you could put a couple points into dexterity depending on what your gear looks like, but realistically you just want to put enough points into vitality so that with battle orders up you have over 1,000 life, and then dump everything else into energy. On our primary kit we have overcapped res for fire because of the flickering flame, and then we have near cap for both lightning and cold. Again, you would fix this with a 15 all res jewel in your demon machine once you're on perfect end game gear, and then we're at the cap for poison res. We're only running about 100 magic find on the build right now. If you notice that you really don't need the faster hit recovery from Sandstorm check, it's really easy to throw on some War Travelers, and then you're closer to 150 magic find, which is more than good enough for a build that is clearing players 8 content at the rate that we're able to. You'll see that even with the bow equipped, we're at the 65 FCR breakpoint. You could go for the 105, but I noticed I was sacrificing so much functionality on the core build and I was losing so much damage that it really wasn't worth it, even for the faster teleport frames. And we have -18 fire res. Technically speaking, this should be -20 if we had a perfect flickering flame on, and we're somewhere around 290 fire enhanced damage on our bow, which is going to be really important when the patch goes into effect. Now, I said that we fix our attack rating issues with our Mercenary. They are using an infinity. Obviously, this is super important for any elemental build. With this and our amount of minus enemy resistance, even Nightmare Cows are actually sitting at -50 fire resistance, and any monster that's naturally immune to fire damage after our Sunder Charm puts them at 58 fire resistance. So when we were showing that Chaos Sanctuary footage, we were killing monsters on players 8 who were only taking 42% of our total damage. The Infinity's Conviction Aura will help to hit monsters as well, but I always like to be able to have the attack rating that I do, just in case I'm attacking something that's outside of the range of the Conviction Aura. They're using a Fortitude and an Endariel's, and we use a Blessed Aim Merc in particular. You could use a Might Aura Merc. That's not really going to help you at all, and it will slightly increase the damage of your Mercenary, but he's pretty inconsequential. He's basically just a stat stick at this point. And this attack rating means that even if you don't have enough attack rating or dex on your primary gear, this, along with your enchant buff, and at the very least the Ravenfrost and the Demon Machine, you should be fine on chance to hit, unless you're fighting monsters that are higher level than you. Just before we get into the heavy mechanics, I'll go over where you can farm with this build, just in case you already know what you're doing and you just want to see where you can go. The answer is you can go anywhere. That's not hyperbole, it's not an exaggeration. If players ate Chaos at the speeds that we were just able to do it, even against Pit Lords, wasn't a good enough indicator, I took this build everywhere. Obviously, in any areas where fire skills are already really strong, like Stony Tombs and Tal Rasha's Tombs, you absolutely obliterate. You can take off half the gear and still get the exact same effect. Worldstone Keep was an absolute breeze, even with souls. Since we are an energy shield build, you just teleport past them, fire off back towards them, and when you teleport back into range, the bolts hit them as they reactivate, and they die in 1 to 2 shots easily. Flare Jungle with super high density. The Traven Call was a breeze. Bringing it into Cows is obviously one of the best places, but legitimately anywhere. Once you have a Sunder Charm and this kit of gear right here, you don't even need the massive pre-buffing enchant that we're able to get. Even a base level enchant, once it double dips, will be adding something like 8,000 damage to your kit with what you're seeing right here, even without this crazy amulet. And you'll be able to farm players 1 to players 5 with no problem at all. Okay, it wouldn't be a Macro Bio Boy video if I didn't get way too specific about a lot of niche mechanics that you need to understand to fully conceptualize how this build functions. So let's do that. Brought up before that Demon Machine along with Razortail together is going to get us 99% chance to pierce. So it's not perfect, but it's literally as close as we can get without hamstringing the build with the addition of something like Wisdom. The reason why that's so important is again because of how Exploding Arrow works. Exploding Arrow says it's going to explode when it hits a target. Even if you miss, if it makes contact with a target or a wall, it will explode in a small area around it. So you may think, oh, you don't need attack rating. Why do I care about that? I'll just shoot it and it will always hit and it will just explode. It exploding on contact isn't the same thing as it always hitting. The reason why that's so important is because you need to successfully hit a target to pierce. The way the game works is it checks to see if you hit the target and it checks to see if you pierce. If you fail to hit but you fail to pierce, you'll actually see fake phantom projectiles come out of the target that don't actually do any damage at all. It's completely wild and really difficult to show in a video. But if you successfully hit the target and pierce, the arrow will continue to fly forward, hitting the target behind it. The way exploding arrow works is every time it hits a target, it explodes again, and it doesn't have next hit delay. So if you had 5 monsters perfectly clumped together and you successfully hit and pierced each one of them, all 5 of them will get hit with 5 explosions, because it will explode every time it hits and every time it successfully pierces through and hits another target. And then again, the exploding arrow skill applies all elemental fire damage that you have to the explosion itself. And since we're double dipping on Enchant now with the 2.6 patch, that means that we're adding something close to 20,000 fire damage per explosion per arrow hit. So you notice that those cows that we're fighting in players 8 difficulty, they have something around 63,000 life, and they are taking minus 50 fire resistance, meaning they're taking 1.5 damage. So if my arrow is doing 20,000 damage, they're actually taking about 30,000 damage. And then when I fire it off into a pack that explodes 5 times, you'll notice that with a single shot, an entire pack will die. That's because the amount of damage that we're doing with a single arrow is actually strong enough to kill a cow 3 times over. Add on to that the fact that we're using static field to bring everything down to 50% before we do anything at all. This allows us to apply damage to the entire screen, so we only need to fire off a single bolt at each pack, and as long as they're within conviction range, even on players 8, they will get one shot. Now here's the last thing, and I'm just going to explain it just in case it wasn't obvious. The way that Demon Machine works is it says it fires exploding arrows and bolts. What that actually means in game terms is that the Demon Machine has a certain level exploding arrow. Demon Machine's exploding arrow skill level is level 6. The damage really is not important since the skill level has nothing to do with whether or not it explodes or how large the explosion is. So when I use a normal attack, you'll see that it's actually firing off the exploding arrow. This will carry our enchant damage, which is now double dipping on Fire Mastery. Every time that we hit, it will explode, and if we successfully hit and pierce, it will explode again on the target behind it, hitting all the monsters within its radius every time. Just as a quick TLDR summary recap. I know people are going to ask, how tedious is the pre-buff section? Is it super annoying? Do I have to do all this extra stuff? I'll show you it very quickly. First, you just walk outside, you cast Battle Command. Just as a quick aside, you don't have to do this. This is just the most min-max way of doing it, so that when you cast Enchant, it's the highest level. You can completely avoid this. Everything else you can completely do in town. So you're going to telekinesis your stash, you're going to swap on your Ormus, whatever skill ring you have, and whatever plus to fire skill amulet you have. All of that is just shift left clicking, just as easy as that. Control left click will put the cube, your books, and any other charms that aren't plus to fire skill damage into your stash, so you don't have to worry about individually moving each thing, and control clicking from the stash will do that as well. Make sure to put back on your Ashudas, cast your frozen armor, cast your energy shield, cast your enchant on you and onto your mercenary. Then it's just as simple as just shift and control clicking everything back in, and you are done. That's the whole pre-buff. You don't have to do anything else. We built the character so that there is as little item swapping as possible to still get the maximum benefit. Then you can run off and go farm wherever you want. And as we're going around, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we were able to replicate what we actually needed to do on this build to be able to show the damage potential that you will have once the patch goes into play. Now, right now, the fire skill damage is not actually double dipping on ranged attacks yet. So you might be asking yourself, Mac, how is it that you got that much enchant damage onto your character? Shouldn't this not be working? Well, you're technically right. And that's why we had to deal with those hero edited items that you saw in our stash and on our Ashudas. Obviously, Ormus robes, Ashudas, this random amulet, and a Stone of Jordan aren't going to have over 300 enhanced fire skill damage on them normally. The major problem is that while we can buff up our enchant to the appropriate level that it will be, on our primary swap of our character, we only have 294 additional fire skill damage from our mastery as well as our gear. So we needed to be able to take the enchant damage that we have and make it so that when we were on our primary swap, we would be getting the double dip value of enchant damage without being able to get the double dip value. So that's why we need to bump up our plus fire skill damage to such a ludicrous amount. So with our entire pre-buff kit on, our enchant is adding 16,000 to 19,000 fire damage onto our attack, and that's how we're able to replicate what the value would be on our bow once we get the double dip. In fact, this number, I actually slightly miscalculated it. It should be closer to 21,000 total fire damage when we enchant with it, and that's still not even with perfect best in slot gear. That's with the gear that we currently have and what it will look like in the future once the patch goes into play. But that's how we're able to replicate it using the gear and the hero editing that we did to, again, be able to properly show how much the enchant damage would double dip on our near 300 fire elemental damage once the patch goes in. But there you have it. With the change in patch 2.6, this Demon Machine Enchant Bow Sorceress actually gets kind of nutty. Again, we need to see whether or not this change is going to apply to things like Lightning Mastery, plus to Poison skill damage, plus to Cold skill damage, to try to figure out what other builds can kind of benefit from this double dip that they previously couldn't. Let me know what you think. I think this is in a contender for a really strong S tier build. The only issue with it, technically speaking, is that you can't put as much Magic Find on it unless you're willing to sacrifice the plus skills down here. But even without these on here, let me just go look at what the enchant damage looks like. 5,000 and then 247. So we'd be getting the base of 5,000 and then 247, which puts us at 3.4 times that. It's about 16,000 fire damage even without the fire skillers. So you could just slot in Magic Find all down here. You know what? I take back what I said. This thing's an S tier build. I think this contends with every other density clear S tier build in the game, and I'd be hard pressed to find another fire build that can even compete. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.